The rain lashed down in sheets, a gray curtain over Savannah's cobblestone streets, as Sergeant Evelyn Harper pressed herself against the splintered wall of her old wooden porch. Her chest heaved, her uniform soaked through, clinging to her 68-year-old frame like a second skin. Duke, her German shepherd canine, stood rigid beside her, his black and tan fur bristling, a low growl rumbling from his throat. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the glint of her badge and the shadow moving beyond the warped fence. Someone was out there watching. Her gnarled hand tightened on her service pistol, her breath a shallow rasp. "Not tonight," she whispered to Duke, her voice trembling with defiance. Who was it? And why now? Hope you enjoyed this story. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear where you're watching from. Now, let's continue with the story. The storm had rolled in fast, a beast of wind and water that turned the humid Savannah evening into a battlefield of nature's fury. Evelyn's porch creaked under the onslaught, the tin roof drumming a relentless rhythm that drowned out the world beyond. She lowered her gun slowly, her sharp blue eyes scanning the darkness. The shadow was gone, or maybe it had never been there, just a trick of the rain in her weary mind. Duke's growl softened, but his ears stayed pricked, his body taut as a coiled spring. He knew something she didn't, and that gnawed at her. Inside her chest, a familiar ache stirred, not from the damp chill seeping into her bones, but from the years she'd carried alone. Henry, her husband, gone a decade now from a heart attack. Charlie, her boy, taken too soon in a car wreck at 22. The house felt emptier with each passing storm, its walls echoing with ghosts she couldn't shake. Duke was all she had left, her partner in the field and her anchor at home. 8 years they'd been together since she'd pulled him from the canine training kennel after Charlie's death, a scrappy pup with eyes that promised he'd never leave her side. She holstered her weapon and sank into the wicker chair, its cushions sagging under her weight. The sweet tea on the table beside her had gone cold, the glass sweating in the humidity. Duke padded closer, resting his head on her knee, his warm brown eyes locked on hers. "You're too good for me, you know that?" she murmured, running her fingers through his damp fur. He huffed, a soft sound that said he disagreed. She smiled faintly, the lines around her mouth deepening. Retirement loomed just weeks away, a quiet life she wasn't sure she wanted. The precinct had been her purpose since Henry passed, and Duke her reason to keep going. The phone buzzed on the armrest, shattering the moment. Evelyn flinched, her hand hovering over it as the screen lit up with Maggie's name, Captain Margaret Ellis, her boss and oldest friend. She answered, her voice steady despite the unease curling in her gut. "Yeah, Maggie?" "Evelyn, we've got a situation." Maggie's tone was clipped, urgent. "Drug bust down by the river port. That crew we've been tracking, they're moving tonight. I need you and Duke out there." Evelyn's gaze flicked to the storm beyond the porch, the rain slashing sideways now, bending the ancient oaks lining her street. "In this weather? You're kidding." "No choice. They're slipping through our fingers. You're the best I've got." Maggie paused, softer now. "I know you're close to hanging it up, Ev, but I need you one more time." "One more time." The words hung heavy, like the air before a lightning strike. Evelyn glanced at Duke, who'd lifted his head, ears twitching as if he'd heard the call too. She could say no. Should say no. Her knees ached in the damp, Her hands weren't as steady as they'd once been, and the shadow she'd seen, or imagined, still lingered in her mind. But the precinct was her blood, and Duke was her heart. She couldn't turn away. "All right," she said finally, standing with a groan. "We're on our way." "Be careful, Ev," Maggie added, a rare crack of worry in her voice. "This storm's a monster." Evelyn hung up, pocketing the phone. She grabbed her raincoat from the hook by the door, the fabric stiff and worn, and pulled it over her uniform. Duke was already at her side, tail steady, ready. She clipped his leash to its collar, though it was more habit than necessity. He'd never stray far. "One last ride, old friend," she said, echoing her earlier whisper. But this time it carried a weight she couldn't name. She opened the door, and the storm roared in, tugging at her gray hair, now loose from its bun. They stepped into the night, the rain stinging her face like 1,000 tiny needles. Her boots splashed through puddles as she led Duke to the squad car parked under the dripping magnolia tree. The engine sputtered to life, headlights cutting through the downpour, casting eerie beams across the street. She buckled in, Duke settling into the passenger seat, his wet fur steaming up the windows. As she pulled away, she caught a glimpse of her house in the rearview mirror, its sagging porch swallowed by the dark, a lonely sentinel against the tempest. The drive to the port was a blur of wipers and thunder, the riverfront a shadowed maze of cranes and warehouses looming ahead. Evelyn's hands gripped the wheel, her knuckles white. Duke shifted beside her, a low growl building in his chest, his eyes fixed on the blackness beyond the glass. He sensed it. Something wrong. Something waiting. She felt it too. A prickle at the base of her neck, sharper than the storm's bite. She parked near the rendezvous point, the team's voices crackling faintly through her radio over the static. "Harper, you copy?" It was Tom Grayson, her closest teammate, his drawl tight with nerves. "We're in position." "Copy," she replied, her voice firm despite the tremor in her chest. She unclipped Duke's leash, her hand brushing his fur one last time. "Let's go, boy." They stepped out into the deluge, the wind howling like a banshee, and moved toward the port. Duke's growl deepened, his body tensing beside her. Evelyn's heart thudded, her gun drawn now, rain dripping from the barrel. Something was out there, something more than the storm, and as they neared the shadowed edge of the docks, she knew they were walking into a trap. Rain hammered the Savannah riverfront, turning the air into a thick, wet shroud as Evelyn, Harper, and Duke moved through the shadows of the port. The storm roared like a living thing, its gusts tugging at her raincoat, whipping strands of gray hair across her face. Her boots splashed through shallow puddles, the sound swallowed by the wind's howl. Duke stayed close, his black and tan fur slick with water, his ears pinned back but alert, scanning the darkness with a predator's focus. Evelyn's hand rested on her gun, the cold metal a steady weight against her palm. The team was out there, Tom Grayson and the others, positioned somewhere among the rusted cranes and stacked shipping containers. But the static in her earpiece told her the storm had severed their connection. She squinted through the downpour, her sharp blue eyes catching flickers of movement ahead. The drug bust had been Maggie's call, a last-minute scramble to catch a crew moving product under cover of the weather. Evelyn had done dozens of these ops in her 20-plus years on the force, but tonight felt different. The air crackled with more than lightning, something heavy, something wrong. Duke sensed it too. His low growl vibrated against her leg, a warning she learned to trust. "Easy, boy," she murmured, her voice barely audible over the tempest, but her own pulse quickened. a drumbeat in her chest she couldn't quiet. They rounded a stack of crates, the river's edge glinting faintly to their left, its surface churned into whitecaps by the wind. Tom's voice broke through the static, faint and jagged. "Harper, you see anything?" She pressed the radio at her shoulder, rain dripping from her sleeve. "Negative, Grayson. Too damn dark. Where are you?" Static answered, then silence. She cursed under her breath, glancing at Duke. His head snapped to the right, a sharp movement that pulled her attention to a narrow alley between two warehouses. Shadows shifted there, too deliberate to be the storm's play. "Stay sharp," she whispered, more to herself than Duke, and stepped forward, gun raised. The alley was a black maw, its walls slick with rain, the ground a mess of mud and oil. Duke's growl deepened, his body lowering as if ready to spring. Evelyn's boots sank into the muck, her knees protesting the strain, but she pushed on, her breath fogging in the cold. She'd seen too much in her years, dealers, junkies, killers. But this felt personal, like the night itself was stalking her. A flash of lightning lit the alley, and for a split second she saw it. A figure, hooded and hunched, arm raised. Time slowed, the world narrowing to that single image. Then the crack of a gunshot split the air, louder than the thunder. Pain exploded in her chest, a white-hot jolt that sent her staggering back. She hit the ground hard, mud splashing around her, her gun slipping from her hand. Blood bloomed through her uniform, warm and sticky, mixing with the rain. She gasped, a ragged sound, her vision swimming as the figure melted back into the dark. Duke lunged forward, barking ferociously, his teeth bared in a snarl that echoed off the warehouse walls. He planted himself over her, a shield of fur and muscle daring the shooter to come closer. Evelyn's hand fumbled for her radio, but it was gone, lost in the fall. "Duke," she rasped, her voice a threadbare whisper. Blood bubbled in her throat, choking her words. She clawed at the mud, trying to sit up, but her strength was draining fast, pooling beneath her in a crimson stain. The storm swallowed her cries, the wind carrying them away like dust. Duke's barks turned desperate, his nose nudging her cheek, his warm breath a lifeline in the cold. She saw his eyes wild, burning with something beyond loyalty, something fierce and unbreakable. "Go!" she managed, her hand brushing his flank. "Get help!" Her head lolled back, the rain stinging her face, washing the blood from her lips. Duke hesitated, whining low, then turned and bolted into the night, his paws kicking up mud as he vanished into the storm. Evelyn lay there, alone now, the world fading at the edges. Her chest heaved, each breath a knife, twisting deeper. She thought of Henry, his gentle smile, and Charlie, his laugh echoing by the river. Were they waiting for her? The rain blurred into a gray haze, and she wondered if this was it. Her last stand, her last fight. But Duke's absence gnawed at her, a tether pulling her back. He wouldn't let her go. Not yet. The alley grew quieter, the storm's roar softening in her ears, or maybe that was her own pulse slowing. She pressed a trembling hand to her wound, the blood hot against her cold skin. Her badge dug into her hip, a sharp reminder of who she was, a cop, a survivor, a mother to a boy who'd never come home. Duke had been Charlie's dog first, a gift she'd kept after the wreck. Now he was hers, and she was his. She clung to that thought, a fragile thread in the dark, as her eyes fluttered shut. Duke ran like the wind itself, his powerful legs churning through the storm-soaked streets of Savannah. Rain pelted his face, stinging his eyes, but he didn't falter. The lightning, jagged above, casting his shadow long and lean across the cobblestones, a fleeting ghost in the night. His chest heaved, breath bursting in sharp, determined pants, but his mind was a single blazing point. Evelyn. She was fading. He'd felt it in her weakening grip, seen it in the dulling blue of her eyes. He wouldn't lose her, not like he'd lost Charlie. The streets were a maze, twisted and treacherous under the storm's wrath. Fallen branches blocked his path, their gnarled limbs clawing at his fur as he leaped over them. Puddles swallowed his paws, the water cold and deep, but he powered through, muscles straining. The scent of the shooter lingered in his nose, sharp, bitter, familiar, but it wasn't his focus now. Help! He needed help. His ears twitched at every sound, the wail of the wind, the groan of bending trees, but nothing human, nothing close. He cut through an alley, his claws scraping the pavement, then burst onto a wider street. The river loomed to his left, its angry waves crashing against the docks, a mirror to the chaos inside him. He remembered nights with Evelyn, her voice steady as she'd trained him here. Sit, stay, find. She'd taught him purpose, given him a home when Charlie's was gone. Now it was his turn to save her. A flicker of light caught his eye, a church, its steeple piercing the storm like a beacon. The square around it was empty, the rain driving even the bravest souls indoors. But Duke's nose flared, catching a scent he knew. Tom Grayson. The man was near, his patrol car parked under a sagging oak, its headlights dim in the deluge. Duke sprinted toward it, his heart pounding, a deep bark tearing from his throat. Tom stepped out of the car, coffee in hand, his broad shoulders hunched against the rain. He'd been inside the church moments ago, whispering a prayer for Lily, his little girl fighting leukemia back home. The storm had delayed his return to the port, guilt gnawing at him for leaving Evelyn out there. Then he saw Duke, a blur of fur and muscle charging straight for him. The coffee slipped from his grip, splashing into a puddle as Duke leaped, jaws clamping onto his sleeve. "Whoa, Duke, what the hell?" Tom staggered, the dog's strength nearly knocking him over. Duke tugged hard, growling, his eyes wild with urgency. Tom's stomach dropped. He knew that look. Panic, purpose, fear. "Evelyn," he breathed, the name a punch to his gut. She was in trouble. He yanked his radio free, shouting into it. "Officer down! Port District! West Side! Send medics now!" Static crackled back, but he didn't wait for a reply. Duke released him and spun, bolting back into the storm. Tom followed, his boots pounding the wet ground, his breath ragged. The church faded behind them, swallowed by the rain as Duke led the way, fast, sure, a shadow cutting through the night. Tom's mind raced, images of Evelyn flashing like lightning, her teaching him to shoot, her bringing soup when Lily was diagnosed, her calling him son when no one else did. She couldn't be gone, not her. The storm raged on, indifferent to their desperation, but Duke didn't slow. He wove through alleys, leaped over debris, his senses locked on the path back to Evelyn. Tom struggled to keep up, his lungs burning, but he trusted the dog. Duke was Evelyn's heart, and he'd find her. Somewhere ahead she lay bleeding, waiting, and every second stretched into eternity. The night wasn't done with them yet. Rain pounded the cobblestone square outside the old Savannah church, the steeple trembling under the storm's relentless assault. Duke's paws splashed through puddles as he led Officer Tom Grayson back into the night, his black and tan fur a blur against the gray deluge. Tom sprinted behind, his breath ragged, the weight of his soaked uniform dragging at his legs. The German shepherd's urgency was a living thing, a force that pulled Tom forward despite the ache in his chest and the fear clawing at his mind. Duke's deep barks cut through the wind, a beacon in the chaos, guiding them toward the river front, where Evelyn Harper lay bleeding. Tom's radio crackled, the static-laced voice of dispatch barely audible over the storm. "Unit 7, confirm location, medics en route." He pressed the button, shouting, "West side of the port, near the warehouses, hurry!" The words felt futile, swallowed by the tempest, but he clung to them like a lifeline. Evelyn was out there, his mentor, his rock, the woman who'd held him together when Lily's diagnosis shattered his world. He couldn't lose her, not now, not like this. Duke veered left, cutting through a narrow alley, his claws scraping the slick pavement. Tom followed, his boots slipping in the mud, his flashlight beam bouncing wildly off the wet walls. The dog's pace never faltered, his powerful legs driving him forward, with a single-minded focus that Tom envied. Duke knew where she was, felt her fading, in a way Tom couldn't. The thought twisted in his gut, Evelyn, alone, her blood mixing with the rain. He pushed harder, ignoring the burn in his thighs, the cold seeping into his bones. The alley opened onto a wider street, the river's edge glinting faintly through the downpour. Duke's ears twitched, his head snapping toward a shadowed gap between two warehouses. Tom recognized it, the spot where Evelyn had last checked in before the radio went dead. "There!" he yelled, though Duke was already moving, a streak of determination against the storm. Tom's heart hammered, a prayer forming on his lips, one he hadn't spoken since Lily's last hospital stay. Please let her be alive. They reached the alley, a narrow chute of darkness framed by towering metal walls. Duke skidded to a stop, his body rigid, a low whine escaping his throat. Tom's flashlight swept the ground, and his breath caught. Evelyn lay crumpled in the mud, her gray hair fanned out, her uniform dark with blood. The beam trembled in his hand as he dropped to his knees beside her, the rain stinging his eyes. "Evelyn! Oh God, no!" Her chest rose faintly, a shallow, uneven rhythm, but she was still here, still fighting. Duke circled her, nudging her cheek with his nose, his whine sharp and desperate. Tom's hands shook as he pressed them to her wound, just below her ribs, the blood warm and slick against his palms. "Stay with me, Evelyn. You're like my mom, damn it. You don't get to leave me." His voice broke, the words spilling out in a rush. Her badge glinted in the mud beside her, a symbol of the life she'd poured into the Force, into him, into Duke. The rain washed over them relentless, turning the alley into a shallow stream. Tom's fingers slipped, the blood too much, too fast. He tore off his jacket, wadding it against her chest, his mind racing. "Where the hell are they?" he muttered, glancing back toward the street. The storm had slowed everything. Roads flooded, signals jammed. But he couldn't wait. Evelyn's face was pale, her lips tinged blue, her breath a faint rasp. Duke licked her hand, a soft, insistent gesture, as if he could pull her back from the edge. Tom's radio buzzed again, a garbled voice cutting through. "Medic's 5 minutes out. Hold on." 5 minutes. It might as well have been 5 hours. He leaned closer, his forehead nearly touching hers, whispering, "You hear that? They're coming. You just hold on, you stubborn old woman." Her eyelids fluttered, a flicker of awareness, but no words came. Duke pressed against her side, his warmth a contrast to the cold creeping into her skin. Lightning flashed, illuminating the alley, and Tom caught a glimpse of something, a footprint in the mud, too deliberate to be random. The shooter hadn't been some faceless thug. This was personal. He filed it away, his focus narrowing back to Evelyn. "Duke found me," he told her, his voice steadying. "He's a damn hero, you know that? Dragged me through half the city." Duke's ears perked, but his eyes never left her, a silent vow to stay. The wind howled, carrying the distant wail of sirens, faint but growing louder. Tom's hands cramped, the jacket soaked through, but he didn't let up. Evelyn's breath hitched, a shudder running through her, and for a moment he thought he'd lost her. "No, no, no, stay with me," he shouted, shaking her gently. Duke barked, sharp and commanding, as if he could will her heart to keep beating. Her fingers twitched, brushing Duke's fur, and Tom exhaled a shaky laugh, breaking free. "That's it, fight. You always fight." Headlights pierced the dark, tires splashing through the flooded street beyond the alley. The paramedics were here. Tom waved his flashlight, shouting, "Over here! Hurry!" Duke stepped back, his body tense, watching as two figures in rain gear rushed toward them, their gear clattering in the storm. "She's been shot! Lower chest! Losing blood fast!" Tom said, his voice hoarse as he moved aside. The medics dropped their bags, hands moving with practiced speed, assessing, stabilizing. Evelyn's head lolled as they lifted her onto a stretcher, her blood-streaked face ghostly in the flashlight's glow. Duke lunged forward, whining, but Tom grabbed his collar. "Easy, boy, they've got her." The medics worked fast, a pressure bandage slapped over the wound, an oxygen mask pressed to her face. "Critical, but alive," one of them barked into their radio. "Transporting now." Tom followed as they carried her out, Duke at his heels, the rain a cold curtain, closing behind them. The ambulance doors slammed shut, the siren's wail cutting through the storm as it sped away from the port, Evelyn Harper strapped to the stretcher inside. Duke stood in the alley, his fur plastered to his frame, his eyes locked on the fading red lights. Tom Grayson knelt beside him, his hands still stained with her blood, the rain washing it into the mud. "She's going to make it," he said, more to himself than the dog, his voice trembling with exhaustion and hope. Duke whined, a long, mournful sound, and Tom rested a hand on his back, feeling the tension in his muscles. The medics had moved like a whirlwind, their voices sharp and clipped over the storm's roar. "BP's dropping! Get that IV in!" one had shouted as they loaded her up. Tom had caught a glimpse of Evelyn's face through the ambulance window. Pale, slack, but breathing, the mask fogging with each faint exhale. The second medic had nodded at him, a grim acknowledgement. "She's a fighter." Then they were gone, swallowed by the night, leaving Tom and Duke in the aftermath. He stood, his knees creaking, and wiped his face with a wet sleeve, the rain mixing with the sweat and tears he hadn't noticed until now. The alley felt emptier without her, the mud churned where she'd fallen. Her badge still lying there, half buried. He picked it up, its edges cold and slick, and tucked it into his pocket. "We're not done yet," he muttered, glancing at Duke. The dog's ears flicked, his gaze shifting to the shadows beyond the warehouses, as if he could still smell the shooter out there. Tom's mind replayed the moment, Evelyn's collapse, the gunshot's echo, the footprint he'd seen. It wasn't random. He knew it in his bones. She'd been targeted, and whoever did it was long gone, melted into the storm. He clenched his fists, the anger a hot coal in his chest. "We'll find him," he promised Duke, his voice low. "For her." Duke huffed, a soft agreement, his tail low but steady. The rain eased slightly, a brief lull that let the distant rumble of thunder take over. Tom pulled his radio, static crackling as he tried to reach Maggie. "Captain, it's Grayson. Evelyn's hit. Medics took her to Savannah General. I'm heading there now." A pause. Then Maggie's voice broke through, tight with worry. "How bad?" Tom swallowed, the image of her blood-soaked uniform flashing behind his eyes. "Bad, but she's alive. Duke got me to her in time." "Damn it," Maggie breathed. "Stay with her, Tom. I'm on my way." The line went dead, and Tom clipped the radio back to his belt. He looked at Duke, the dog's eyes glinting in the dim light, a mix of grief and resolve. "Let's go, boy," he said, starting toward his patrol car. Duke followed, his steps deliberate, his head high despite the weight of the night. The drive to the hospital was a blur, the wipers slapping against the windshield, the streets a mess of flooded gutters and fallen branches. Tom's hands gripped the wheel, his knuckles white, his mind a tangle of fear and guilt. He should have been with her, should have seen it coming. Evelyn had trained him better than that. Her voice echoed in his head, sharp and steady. "Eyes open, Grayson, always." He glanced at Duke in the passenger seat, the dog's nose pressed to the window, fogging the glass with each breath. Savannah General loomed ahead, its lights a harsh glow against the storm-dark sky. Tom parked crookedly, jumping out as Duke leaped after him, paws hitting the wet pavement with a splash. The emergency entrance buzzed with activity, nurses in scrubs, a stretcher rolling past. But Tom's focus narrowed to the desk. "Evelyn Harper," he said, his voice rough. "Gunshot victim, just brought in." The nurse typed quickly, her face softening. "She's in surgery. Waiting rooms down the hall." Tom nodded, leading Duke through the sterile corridors, the dog's claws clicking on the tile. The waiting room was a stark box of plastic chairs and flickering fluorescence, the air thick with antiseptic and tension. He sank into a seat, Duke pacing beside him, restless, his eyes fixed on the double doors to the OR. "She's tough," Tom said, rubbing his face. "Tougher than me, that's for damn sure." Duke whined, pressing his nose to the floor, where Evelyn's scent lingered faintly on Tom's boots. Minutes stretched into an hour, the storm's rumble a distant echo through the walls. Tom's thoughts drifted to Lily, asleep at home with his wife, to Evelyn bringing her a teddy bear during chemo. She'd been family when his own had crumbled, and now she was fighting for her life. Duke stopped pacing, lying down with a heavy sigh, his head on Tom's foot. "You did good, boy," Tom murmured, scratching behind his ears. "Better than good." A doctor emerged, mask pulled down, his face lined with fatigue. Tom shot to his feet, Duke rising with him. "Sergeant Harper's out of surgery," the man said, his voice steady. "Bullet nicked an artery, but we got it. She's stable, for now. ICU's next." Tom exhaled, relief flooding him, though the "for now" hung heavy. "Can we see her?" he asked. The doctor glanced at Duke, hesitating but nodded. "Keep him calm." Tom pushed through the doors, Duke at his side, the promise of seeing Evelyn alive driving them forward. The night wasn't over, but they'd won this round, thanks to her strength and Duke's heart. The sterile hum of Savannah General Hospital buzzed around Tom Grayson as he pushed through the double doors to the ICU, Duke's claws clicking sharply against the tile floor. The storm outside had dulled to a steady drizzle, its fury spent, but inside a quieter battle raged. Evelyn Harper lay beyond those doors, her life hanging by a thread after surgery, and Tom's chest tightened with every step. Duke moved beside him, his black and tan fur still damp from the rain, his ears twitching at every sound. Nurses' footsteps, the beep of machines, the faint groan of a patient down the hall. The German shepherd's eyes burned with a restless intensity, locked on the path ahead, as if he could will Evelyn back to him. The waiting room had been unbearable. Too bright, too still, a cage for the fear clawing at Tom's gut. He'd sat there with Duke, replaying the alley over and over, her blood on his hands, the shooter's shadow vanishing into the storm. The doctor's words, "stable for now," had been a lifeline, but the uncertainty gnawed at him. Evelyn wasn't just his sergeant. She was the woman who'd taught him to stand tall, who'd brought soup to his house when Lily was sick, who'd called Duke family when no one else understood. Losing her wasn't an option. They reached the ICU doors, and a nurse in blue scrubs stepped forward, her face stern. "No dogs allowed," she said, arms crossed. Tom's jaw tightened, his voice low but firm. "He's her partner. He stays." Duke growled softly, a warning rumble, his body pressing closer to Tom as if daring her to try. The nurse hesitated, glancing at the dog's tense frame, then sighed. "Fine, but keep him quiet." She stepped aside and Tom nodded, pushing through with Duke at his heels. The ICU was a dim, hushed world of curtains and machines, the air thick with antiseptic and the faint tang of blood. Evelyn's bay was at the end, a glass-walled room where she lay motionless, hooked to tubes and monitors. Tom stopped short, his breath catching. She looked smaller than he'd ever seen her. Her gray hair limp against the pillow, her face pale and slack, an oxygen mask fogging with shallow breaths. The bandage on her chest rose and fell, a fragile rhythm, and the heart monitor beeped steadily, a lifeline in the silence. Duke whined a sharp, piercing sound and lunged forward, his front paws hitting the bed's edge. Tom grabbed his collar, pulling him back. "Easy, boy, she's here." The dog's tail drooped, but he didn't fight, settling instead to press his nose against Evelyn's hand, dangling limp over the side. Her fingers twitched, a faint response, and Tom's throat tightened. "She knows you're here," he murmured, sinking into the chair beside her, his hands still stained with faint traces of her blood. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, watching her chest rise and fall. "You scared the hell out of me. You know that?" he said, his voice rough. "Duke, too. Dragged me through that damn storm like his life depended on it." The dog huffed, resting his head on the bed, his warm brown eyes fixed on Evelyn's face. Tom rubbed his face, exhaustion settling into his bones. He'd seen her take down suspects twice her size, heard her laugh off injuries that would have sidelined him, but this was different. She was 68, a widow, a survivor, and now she was fighting for every breath. A nurse slipped in, checking the IV line, her movements quick and quiet. "She's a tough one," she said, glancing at Tom. "Bullet missed her heart by an inch. Lost a lot of blood, but she's hanging on." Tom nodded, his gaze never leaving Evelyn. "She's always been tough," he replied, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "Tougher than me, that's for damn sure." The nurse smiled back, a small knowing look, then left them alone again. Duke shifted, his ears flicking as a distant clap of thunder rumbled through the walls. Tom reached out, resting a hand on the dog's back, feeling the steady rise and fall of his breathing. "You did good, boy," he said softly. "Better than good. She'd be proud." Duke's tail thumped once, a muted acknowledgement, but his focus stayed on Evelyn, unwavering. Tom leaned back, the plastic chair creaking under him, and let the silence settle. The storm had taken its toll, but they were here, together. And that was enough for now. Minutes stretched into hours, the night deepening outside. Tom's thoughts drifted to Lily, asleep at home, to the precinct buzzing with news of the shooting. He'd called his wife from the waiting room, his voice shaking as he'd told her Evelyn was alive. "She's family," he'd said, and he'd meant it. Now, sitting here, he felt the weight of that bond, the years of trust and quiet strength she'd given him. Duke whined again, softer this time, and Tom looked up to see Evelyn's fingers curl slightly, brushing the dog's fur. "She's still in there," he whispered, hope flickering in his chest. The doors swung open and Captain Maggie Ellis strode in, her coat dripping, her face lined with worry. She stopped at the sight of Evelyn, her breath hitching, then turned to Tom. "How is she?" she asked, her voice tight. Tom stood, meeting her gaze. "Stable, they say. Surgery went okay, but it's touch and go." Maggie nodded, her eyes softening as they landed on Duke. "He got you to her?" she asked, already knowing the answer. "Yeah," Tom said. "Ran like hell through that storm. Saved her life." Maggie knelt beside Duke, scratching behind his ears. "Good boy," she murmured, her voice thick. She straightened, looking at Evelyn, and Tom saw the flicker of something deeper. Grief, maybe, or guilt. Maggie and Evelyn went back decades, friends before they were cops, sisters in all but blood. "She's got to pull through," Maggie said, more to herself than him. "She's too damn stubborn to quit." Tom managed a small smile. "That's what I keep telling her." Maggie stayed a while, standing vigil with them, the three of them a quiet guard around Evelyn's bed. The storm faded to a distant murmur, the hospital's hum taking over, and Tom felt the first real breath of relief since the alley. Evelyn was alive, Duke was here, and they'd face whatever came next together. Evelyn Harper drifted in a sea of darkness, a weightless void where pain couldn't reach her. The storm was gone, replaced by a silence so deep it pressed against her ears. She floated, untethered, her body a distant memory, until a faint sound pierced the haze. A low, mournful whine. Duke. Her mind latched onto it, a thread pulling her back, and the darkness shifted, softening into a familiar scene. The Savannah River, its banks lush with summer green, the water glinting under a warm sun. Henry stood there, his fishing pole in hand, his gray hair catching the light. Beside him, Charlie laughed, his young face bright, tossing a stick for a puppy Duke to chase. Evelyn's heart ached, a sweet, sharp pang as she watched them, her husband, her son, her lost pieces. They turned to her, smiling, and Henry's voice carried over the breeze. "Come on, Ev. Water's perfect today." Charlie waved, his grin wide. "Mom, look at Duke. He's so fast." She stepped toward them, the grass soft under her feet, but something held her back. The whine came again, louder, insistent, and the riverbank blurred, the sun dimming. "Not yet," she whispered, her voice echoing in the void. Henry's smile faded, understanding in his eyes, and Charlie nodded, tossing the stick one last time. "We'll wait," he said, and they turned back to the river, their figures dissolving into mist. The whine grew sharper, pulling her up through layers of shadow, and suddenly she was cold, heavy, trapped. Pain flared in her chest, a dull, throbbing ache, and she felt the weight of her body again. The bed beneath her, the tubes in her arm, the mask over her face. Her eyes fluttered open, the dim light of the ICU stinging, and she saw him. Duke, his head resting on her hand. His warm brown eyes locked on hers. A soft bark escaped him, high and urgent, and she felt his nose nudge her fingers, a lifeline in the haze. Tom Grayson jolted upright in his chair, nearly knocking it over, his face breaking into a relieved grin. "Evelyn, you're awake! Thank God!" He leaned closer, his voice trembling with emotion. "Can you hear me?" She tried to speak, but her throat was dry, the words stuck behind the mask. Her lips moved, a faint curve, and she managed a whisper. "Duke." Tom laughed, a shaky sound, and patted the dog's head. "Yeah, Duke. He never left your side." Maggie Ellis stood at the foot of the bed, her arms crossed, her eyes red but steady. "You gave us a hell of a scare, Ev," she said, her voice rough with unshed tears. "Don't do it again." Evelyn's gaze shifted to her, a flicker of recognition, and she nodded weakly, the effort draining her. Duke licked her hand, his tail wagging once, a small victory in the quiet room. The heart monitor beeped faster, a sign of life returning, and Tom sank back into his chair, rubbing his face. "Damn right, Duke," he said. "He dragged me through that storm to find you. Never seen anything like it." Evelyn's fingers curled into Duke's fur, a slow, deliberate motion, and she felt his warmth seep into her, grounding her. She was back. Barely, but she was back. Memories flickered, jagged and bright. The alley, the gunshot, the rain washing her blood away. She saw the shooter's shadow, a hooded figure, and a chill ran through her, sharper than the pain. It wasn't a stranger. She knew that shape, that stance. Her mind groped for a name, but it slipped away, buried in the fog of shock and drugs. She'd figure it out later. For now, she was here, with Duke, with Tom, with Maggie. The nurse slipped in, checking the monitors, her face softening at the sight of Evelyn awake. "You're a miracle, Sergeant," she said, adjusting the IV. "We'll move you to a regular room soon if this keeps up." Evelyn didn't respond. Her energy spent, but her eyes stayed on Duke, his presence a balm to the ache in her chest. The nurse left, and the room settled into a fragile peace, the machines humming a steady rhythm. Tom leaned forward, his voice low. "You rest, okay? We've got you." Maggie nodded, her hand brushing Evelyn's arm, a rare gesture from the tough captain. "Sleep, Ev. We'll be here." Evelyn's eyelids grew heavy, the pull of exhaustion too strong to fight, but she clung to Duke's warmth, his soft whine echoing in her ears. The riverbank faded, Henry and Charlie slipping back into memory, and she let herself drift, safe in the knowledge that Duke had brought her home. The night stretched on, the hospital a quiet fortress against the storm's last whispers. Evelyn slept, her breathing steadying, and Duke stayed by her side, his head on her hand, a silent guard. Tom and Maggie watched over them, a makeshift family bound by loyalty and love, waiting for the dawn, and the answers that would come with it. The ICU room at Savannah General Hospital was a cocoon of soft beeps, and dim light, the storm outside reduced to a faint patter against the windows. Evelyn Harper lay propped against pillows, her gray hair tangled, her face still pale but alive with a flicker of the fire that had carried her through decades on the force. The oxygen mask was gone, replaced by a nasal cannula, and her chest rose with slow, deliberate breaths, each one a quiet victory over the bullet that had nearly claimed her. Duke rested his head on the bed beside her, his black and tan fur brushing her hand, his warm brown eyes never straying from her face. Tom Grayson sat in the chair nearby, his broad shoulders slumped, exhaustion etched into the lines around his eyes. Evelyn's voice rasped as she spoke, weak but steady. "Duke." He knew. She squeezed his fur gently, her fingers trembling with the effort. Tom leaned forward, a faint smile breaking through his fatigue. Knew what, Ev? That you were in trouble? Hell, he damn near tore my arm off to get me to you. Duke's ears twitched, a soft huff escaping him as if agreeing. Evelyn's lips curved, a ghost of a smile, and she nodded. Not just that. The shooter wasn't random. Tom's smile faded, his brow furrowing. What do you mean? Before she could answer, the door swung open and Captain Maggie Ellis stepped in, her coat slung over her arm, her face a mask of controlled tension. She'd been out in the storm, chasing leads while Evelyn fought for her life, and the strain showed in the tightness of her jaw. She stopped at the foot of the bed, her gaze locking with Evelyn's. "You're awake," she said, relief softening her voice. "Good, because we've got a problem." Evelyn's eyes sharpened, the old cop in her stirring despite the pain. "What did you find?" Maggie glanced at Tom, then back to Evelyn, her hands clenching into fists. "Ballistics came back on the bullet. It's a match to a service weapon, ours. And I dug into the footage from a dock camera that survived the storm. Grainy as hell, but I saw enough. It was Jimmy Reed." The name hit Evelyn like a second gunshot, a jolt that made her breath catch. Tom straightened, his voice sharp. "Reed? That bastard we fired years back?" Maggie nodded, her expression grim. "Yeah, the one Evelyn turned in for taking bribes from that smuggling ring down by the river. Got canned, lost his pension, swore he'd make her pay. Looks like he finally tried." Evelyn's mind raced, fragments of memory snapping into place. The shadow in the alley, the familiar hunch of his shoulders, the bitter edge to his voice she'd heard a decade ago when he'd stormed out of the precinct. "Jimmy," she whispered, her hand tightening in Duke's fur. "I should have seen it." Duke growled low, sensing her tension, his eyes flicking to the door as if Reed might walk through it. Tom stood, pacing the small room, his boots scuffing the tile. "That son of a bitch. I'll find him, Ev. I swear it. He doesn't get to do this and walk away." His voice shook with anger, his hands balling into fists. Maggie put a hand on his shoulder, steadying him. "We will, Tom. I've got units out already combing the city. He's not smart enough to disappear in this weather." She turned to Evelyn, her tone softening. "You just focus on getting better. We'll handle Reed." Evelyn shook her head, a stubborn glint in her eyes. "He came for me, Maggie. I'm not sitting this out." Her voice was frail but fierce, the kind of resolve that had made her a legend in Savannah's precinct. Tom stopped pacing, looking at her with a mix of awe and worry. "You're barely out of surgery, Ev. Let us take this one." She met his gaze, unyielding. Duke knew it was him. Smelled him, maybe. "We're not done yet, are we, boy?" Duke barked, a sharp, commanding sound, his tail thumping once against the bed. Maggie sighed, rubbing her temples. "You're impossible, you know that. Always have been." She pulled up a chair, sitting beside Tom, her presence a quiet anchor. "Fine. But you're not moving until the doc clears you. Reed's our problem for now." Evelyn didn't argue, but the set of her jaw said she wasn't conceding either. She leaned back, her energy waning. And Duke pressed closer, his warmth a steady comfort against the storm of emotions swirling inside her. Tom sank back into his seat, his anger simmering but contained. How'd he even get close enough? He asked, more to himself than them. "We had the port locked down." Maggie shrugged, her voice bitter. Storm gave him cover. He knew he'd be stretched thin, probably been watching her for weeks. The thought chilled Evelyn. Jimmy Reed, lurking in the shadows of her life, waiting for his moment. She'd put him away, ruined him, and now he'd nearly taken everything from her. The room fell quiet, the heart monitor's steady beep filling the space. Evelyn's eyes drifted to Duke, his loyalty a lifeline she clung to. She remembered the days she'd reported Reed, the venom in his glare as he'd spat. "You'll regret this, Harper." She hadn't, until now. But Duke had sensed it, had run through hell to save her, and that was enough to keep her fighting. "We'll get him," she murmured, her voice fading as sleep tugged at her. "Together." Maggie and Tom exchanged a look, a silent pact to protect her, to finish what Reed had started. The night stretched on, the hospital a fortress around them, and Evelyn slipped into a restless doze, Duke's steady breathing a rhythm she matched with her own. Sunlight filtered through the hospital blinds, a pale gold that softened the sterile edges of Evelyn Harper's new room. She'd been moved from the ICU that morning, a step toward recovery, though the ache in her chest lingered like a stubborn guest. The nasal cannula was gone, her breathing easier now, and she sat propped up, her hands resting on the blanket. Duke lay beside her, his head on her lap, his eyes half closed but alert, as if guarding her even in rest. The storm had passed, leaving Savannah damp and quiet, the air outside heavy with the scent of wet earth and river water. Tom Grayson had stepped out for coffee, his absence a brief reprieve from his hovering worry. But Captain Maggie Ellis sat across from her, flipping through a notepad. "Reed's still out there," Maggie said, her voice low, her eyes on the page. "Units checked his old haunts. Nothing. He's gone to ground." Evelyn nodded, her gaze drifting to the window, the riverfront barely visible through the trees. "He's not gone far," she said, her voice stronger than it had been. "He's too angry to run." Maggie looked up, her brow furrowing. "You sure you're up for this, Ev? You don't have to play detective from a hospital bed." Evelyn's lips twitched, a faint smirk. "I've been shot, Maggie, not buried. I know Jimmy. He'll come back. He can't help himself." Duke shifted, his ears perking at her tone, and she scratched behind them, a ritual that steadied them both. The door creaked open and Tom walked in, balancing 3 styrofoam cups. "Black for you, Maggie," he said, handing one over. "And tea for the patient." He set Evelyn's cup on the tray, his eyes softening as he looked at her. "You're looking better." She took the tea, her hand steady now, and sipped it, the warmth soothing her throat. "Feeling better," she replied. "Good enough to get out of here soon." Tom chuckled, settling into his chair. "Doc'll love that. You're already driving him nuts." Maggie snorted, a rare laugh, and the room lightened for a moment, a brief escape from the weight of Reed's shadow. But Evelyn's mind was elsewhere, tracing the river's curve outside, remembering the days she'd walked its banks with Charlie and Duke. The memory hit her hard, Charlie's laugh, his stick-throwing games, the way Duke had bounded after them. A puppy then, full of life. She'd lost him there, in a wreck on River Street, and Duke had become her tether to that past. She set the cup down, her voice quiet but firm. "I need to see it, Tom. The riverfront, where it happened." Tom's smile faded, his brow creasing. "Ev, you're not cleared to leave yet. Doc said—" She cut him off, her eyes locking with his. "I don't mean today. Soon. I need to walk it again with Duke. Feel it." Maggie leaned forward, her voice gentle but probing. "Why, Ev? What's out there?" Evelyn hesitated, her fingers sinking into Duke's fur. "Answers, maybe. Or just peace." "I saw Henry and Charlie in that alley, Maggie. When I was down, they were waiting, but Duke pulled me back." Her voice cracked and she swallowed hard, steadying herself. I need to know why I'm still here. Tom's face softened, understanding dawning, and he nodded slowly. When you're ready, we'll go. Me and Duke will be right there. Maggie closed her notepad, her expression unreadable. You're still here because you're too damn stubborn to quit, that's why. And Duke's not letting you go anywhere. Evelyn managed a small laugh, the sound rusty but real. Guess you're right. Duke huffed, pressing closer, his warmth a quiet promise against her side. The conversation shifted, Maggie updating them on the search, roadblocks, tips from informants, nothing solid yet. Tom chimed in, his anger at Reed simmering beneath his words, but Evelyn only half listened, her gaze drifting back to the window. The river called to her, a pull she couldn't explain, a piece of her story waiting to be reclaimed. She'd nearly died there, and something in her needed to face it, to stand where she'd fallen and feel the ground beneath her feet again. A nurse poked her head in, breaking the moment. Visiting hours are up, folks. She needs rest. Maggie stood, squeezing Evelyn's shoulder. Sleep, Ev. We'll get him. Tom followed, pausing to ruffle Duke's ears. You take care of her, boy. Duke's tail thumped, a solemn vow, and they left, the door clicking shut behind them. Evelyn leaned back, her eyes closing, the tea's warmth lingering in her chest. Duke shifted, his head settling on her lap, his breathing a steady rhythm that matched her own. She thought of the river, of Charlie's stick sailing through the air, of Henry's quiet smile. We're not done yet, are we? She whispered, her hand resting on Duke's neck. He didn't move, but his presence was answer enough. Sleep came slowly, the river's song weaving through her dreams, a promise of healing just out of reach. The next day loomed, a step closer to answers, to Reed, to the life she'd fought to keep. Duke would be there, and so would she, together as always. The precinct courtyard in Savannah buzzed with quiet anticipation, the late morning sun filtering through moss-draped oaks, casting dappled shadows on the cobblestone. Evelyn Harper stood at the edge of the crowd, her old uniform crisp against her still-healing frame, the stitches beneath pulling slightly with each breath. Duke sat beside her, his black and tan fur gleaming, his head high as if he understood the weight of the moment. The air carried the faint scent of river water and magnolias, a soft southern breeze stirring the flags that lined the space. A small podium stood at the center, flanked by officers and a handful of locals, their faces a mix of pride and curiosity. Evelyn's hands rested lightly on her cane, a temporary crutch she'd grudgingly accepted after leaving Savannah General 2 days ago. The hospital had been a blur of white walls and beeping machines, but now out here she felt the world again, the warmth of the sun, the solidity of the ground, the steady presence of Duke. Tom Grayson stood to her left, his broad shoulders squared, his eyes scanning the crowd, with a protective edge. Captain Maggie Ellis was at the podium, her voice carrying over the murmurs as she adjusted the microphone, her coat swapped for a dress uniform that made her look every inch the leader she was. Ladies and gentlemen, Maggie began, her tone firm but warm, we're here to honor a hero. Not just a member of this force, but a partner who went beyond duty, who ran through a storm to save one of our own. She paused, her gaze finding Evelyn and Duke, a flicker of emotion breaking through her usual steel. Sergeant Evelyn Harper and K-9 Duke faced the impossible that night, and they're standing here because of each other. The crowd clapped, a swell of sound that rolled over Evelyn like a wave. She shifted her weight, her chest tightening, Not from the wound, but from the weight of their eyes, their gratitude. She'd never been one for spotlight. The job was its own reward. The quiet nights with Duke her solace. But this was different. This was for him. She glanced down at Duke, his ears perked, his tail still, and whispered, "You earned this, boy." Maggie stepped aside, motioning for them to come forward. Tom gave her a gentle nudge, his voice low. "Go on, Ev. They're waiting." She nodded, leaning on the cane as she moved, Duke matching her pace with a grace that belied his 8 years. The crowd parted, officers saluting, civilians murmuring, and Evelyn felt a lump rise in her throat. She stopped at the podium, turning to face them, her sharp blue eyes taking in the sea of faces, some familiar, some strangers, all here for Duke. She cleared her throat, her voice raspy but steady. "I'm not much for speeches," she said, drawing a few chuckles. "Never have been. But I've got something to say today, because this isn't about me, it's about him." She rested a hand on Duke's head, his fur warm under her fingers. "That night I was down, bleeding out in the mud, and I thought that was it. I saw my husband Henry and my boy, Charlie, waiting for me. But Duke, he didn't let me go. He ran through hell, through that storm, to bring Tom back to me. He didn't just save my life. He saved my soul." Her voice cracked, and she paused, swallowing hard. The crowd was silent, hanging on her words, and she saw an older woman near the front wipe her eyes, her hands trembling. Evelyn pressed on, her gaze steady. "I've been a cop for over 20 years. Lost more than I can count. My family, my peace. Duke's been my partner through it all, my reason to keep going. This medal's his, but it's for every one of us who's ever had someone, or something, pull us back from the edge." The applause erupted again, louder this time, and Maggie stepped forward, a small velvet box in her hands. She opened it, revealing a silver medal engraved with valor, and knelt beside Duke. "You're a hero, boy," she said, her voice thick as she pinned it to his collar. Duke tilted his head, a soft huff escaping him, and the crowd laughed, the tension breaking. Maggie stood, saluting him, and the officers followed suit, a ripple of respect that spread through the courtyard. Evelyn stepped back, letting Tom guide her to the side, her legs shaky, but her heart full. The ceremony continued. Speeches from the mayor, a few words from the chief, but her focus drifted to the woman who'd cried. She was older, maybe 70, her white hair pulled into a bun, her eyes red-rimmed as she approached. "Sergeant Harper?" she said, her voice quavering. Evelyn nodded, and the woman smiled through her tears. "I had a dog like him once. Saved me from a fire when I was too old to run. Seeing Duke, it's like seeing him again." Evelyn's throat tightened, and she reached out, squeezing the woman's hand. "They're special, aren't they?" she said softly. "More than we deserve." The woman nodded, wiping her face, and shuffled back to her seat, leaving Evelyn with a warmth she hadn't expected. She looked at Duke, the medal glinting in the sun, and whispered, "One last patrol, huh?" His tail wagged once, a quiet, "Yes." The crowd dispersed slowly, officers clapping Tom on the shoulder, locals lingering to snap photos of Duke. Maggie joined them, her expression softer than usual. "You did good up there, Ev," she said. "Meant every word." Evelyn shrugged, leaning on her cane. "Had to. For him." Maggie smiled, a rare crack in her armor, and glanced at Tom. "Keep her out of trouble, Grayson. She's got that look again." Tom grinned. "Too late for that, Captain." As the courtyard emptied, Evelyn felt the pull of the riverfront, the need to walk it with Duke, to face where she'd fallen. She'd told Tom and Maggie she'd do it soon, and now, with the medal on Duke's collar, it felt closer, like a promise she could keep. The day wasn't over, but this moment, this honor, was a step toward healing, a bridge to whatever came next. The late afternoon sun hung low over Savannah, painting the sky in hues of gold and pink as Evelyn Harper stepped out of her squad car at Forsyth Park. Her cane tapped the pavement, a steady rhythm beside Duke's soft footfalls, his medal glinting faintly against his black and tan fur. She'd insisted on this, her last patrol, a quiet walk through the park where she'd trained him, where she'd found solace after Charlie's death. Tom Grayson trailed a few steps behind, his hands in his pockets, his eyes scanning the paths with a mix of nostalgia and concern. The air was warm, heavy with the scent of damp grass and blooming jasmine, a gentle contrast to the storm that had nearly Evelyn moved slowly, her stitches pulling with each step, but she refused Tom's offer of an arm. "I'm not that fragile," she said, her voice gruff but laced with a smile. He chuckled, falling into step beside her. "Never said you were, Ev. Just don't want you keeling over before I get you home." Duke huffed, pressing against her leg, his presence a steady anchor as they followed the winding path past the fountain, its water sparkling in the fading light. The park was quiet, a few joggers and dog walkers dotting the distance, but Evelyn's world narrowed to the memories this place held. She saw Charlie here, a lanky teenager tossing sticks for a puppy Duke, his laughter ringing through the oaks. She'd brought Duke back after the wreck, training him under these same trees, his eager bounds a lifeline, when grief threatened to drown her. Now, years later, he'd saved her again, and this walk felt like a closing circle, a farewell to the uniform, a hello to something new. She stopped at a bench near the fountain, its wooden slats worn smooth by time, and eased herself down, the cane resting beside her. Duke sat at her feet, his head tilting as he watched her, the medal a quiet badge of their bond. Tom joined her, stretching his legs out, his silence comfortable but expectant. "You okay?" he asked finally, his voice soft. She nodded, her gaze on the fountain's spray. "Just thinking. About Charlie, Henry, about that night." Tom followed her gaze, his hands clasping together. "You've been through hell, Ev. Most folks would have quit." She snorted, a dry sound. "Not my style, besides I had him." She scratched behind Duke's ears, his tail thumping against the ground. "And you. Couldn't have made it without you dragging me back, too." Tom grinned, a flush creeping up his neck. "Duke did the heavy lifting, I just followed." A young officer approached, his uniform crisp, his face bright with admiration. "Sergeant Harper," he said, stopping a few feet away. "Heard about the ceremony. You're a legend around here." Evelyn raised an eyebrow, her lips twitching. "No, he is," she said, nodding at Duke. The kid laughed, saluting them both, then jogged off, leaving them in peace. Tom shook his head. "See? You're famous now." She waved a hand, dismissing it, but the warmth lingered. The park settled around them, the sun dipping lower, casting long shadows across the grass. Evelyn's thoughts drifted to the riverfront, the alley where she'd fallen, the pull she'd felt since waking in the hospital. "I need to go back there, Tom," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "Tomorrow, maybe. Walk it with Duke. Face it." He studied her, his brow creasing, but he didn't argue. "When you're ready, I'll drive you. We'll do it together." She nodded, grateful for his steady presence, and leaned back, the bench creaking under her weight. Duke shifted, resting his head on her knee, his eyes half closed, but watchful. She thought of the medal ceremony, the woman's tears, the weight of Duke's loyalty. This patrol wasn't just a goodbye to the force, it was a reclaiming. A step toward the peace she'd chased since Charlie's wreck, since Henry's quiet passing. The river waited, a final piece to fit into place, and she'd face it with Duke at her side. A light rain began to fall, a soft drizzle that misted the air, and Evelyn tilted her face up, letting it cool her skin. "We've come far, haven't we?" she murmured, her hand on Duke's neck. He huffed, a soft agreement, and Tom smiled, pulling his jacket tighter. "Yeah, you have. And you're not done yet." The raindrops glistened on Duke's fur, a quiet echo of the storm they'd survived, and Evelyn felt a calm settle over her, a promise of rest, just within reach. They sat there as the light faded, the park empty, and around them a trio bound by years and trials. Tomorrow would bring the river, the past, the answers she sought. But for now this was enough. Duke's warmth, Tom's quiet strength, the rhythm of the rain. One last patrol, one last stand, and then maybe a new beginning. The morning sun rose gentle over Savannah, its golden light spilling across the weathered porch of Evelyn Harper's old wooden house, painting the peeling white boards in a soft glow. A faint breeze rustled the magnolia tree in the yard, carrying the earthy scent of the river and the promise of a quiet day. Evelyn sat in her wicker chair, her cane resting against the armrest, her hands folded in her lap. Duke lay at her feet, his black and tan fur dappled with gray around his muzzle, his metal glinting faintly where it hung on his collar. His head rested on his paws, his warm brown eyes half closed, but they flicked up to her now and then. A silent check that she was still there. It had been 3 months since the ceremony, since that last patrol in Forsyth Park, and the world had settled into a rhythm Evelyn hadn't known in years. Retirement had come officially. Her badge now a keepsake on the mantel beside Henry's fishing lures and Charlie's baseball glove. The precinct had thrown her a send-off, cake, coffee, too many handshakes. But it was this porch, this stillness, that felt like home. She'd walked the riverfront with Duke the day after the park, Tom at her side, facing the alley where she'd fallen. The mud was gone, the blood washed away, but standing there she'd felt the weight lift, a piece of her soul reclaimed. Jimmy Reed was behind bars, caught 2 weeks later in a rundown motel, his confession a bitter footnote to her survival. The screen door creaked and Tom Grayson stepped out, balancing 2 mugs of tea. His broad frame filled the space, his face softer now. The lines of worry eased by time and good news. Lily's cancer was in remission, a miracle he credited to Evelyn's stubborn hope. Behind him, Lily herself followed, a small figure with a shy smile, her dark hair tied back with a ribbon. She carried a framed photo, her hands careful around the edges, and Evelyn's heart warmed at the sight of them both. "Morning, Ev," Tom said, handing her a mug, the steam curling in the cool air. "Thought we'd drop by. Lily's got something for you." He settled into the chair beside her, his boots scuffing the porch boards, while Lily stepped forward, her eyes bright. "It's you and Duke," she said, holding out the frame. "From the ceremony. I picked it myself." Evelyn took it, her fingers brushing the glass, and studied the image. Her in her uniform, Duke beside her, the medal pinned proudly, the crowd a blur in the background. She looked older there, worn but strong, and Duke's gaze was steady, a mirror to her own. "It's perfect, sweetheart," she said, her voice thick. "Thank you." Lily beamed, then knelt to pet Duke, his tail thumping lazily against the floor. "He's the best," she said, and Evelyn nodded, a quiet agreement. Tom sipped his tea, watching them with a contented smile. "She's been talking about him non-stop since she got better. Says he's her hero, too." Evelyn glanced at him, her sharp blue eyes softening. "He's got that effect on people, always has." She set the frame on the table beside her, next to the cold, sweet tea she'd been nursing, and leaned back, the chair creaking under her weight. The photo would go inside later, beside Henry and Charlie's, a new piece of her family's story. The porch fell into a comfortable silence, the kind that didn't need filling. Evelyn's thoughts drifted, to the river, to the storm, to the years she'd carried alone. She'd nearly lost it all that night, her blood seeping into the mud, her mind slipping to Henry and Charlie's waiting arms. But Duke had pulled her back, his whine a lifeline through the dark, and now here she was, alive, whole, surrounded by a family she'd built from the ashes. Tom and Lily weren't blood, but they were hers, just as Duke was, bonds forged in fire and loyalty. She reached down, her hand finding Duke's neck, his fur warm under her fingers. "We made it, buddy," she murmured, her voice low, meant only for him. He lifted his head, meeting her gaze, and huffed softly, a sound that said he'd always known they would. The metal caught the light, a quiet testament to his courage, but it was his eyes that held her. The same eyes that had watched her train him, mourn her losses, fight her battles. He was older now, slower, but still her protector, her heart. Tom cleared his throat, breaking the moment. "Maggie called this morning, said the precinct's naming a K-9 award after Duke. First ceremony's next spring." Evelyn raised an eyebrow, a faint smirk tugging at her lips. "They're really milking this hero thing, huh?" Tom laughed, a deep, easy sound. "Can you blame him? He's the real deal." Lily giggled, scratching Duke's ears, and Evelyn joined in, the sound rusty but genuine, a rare echo of the lightness she'd once known. The sun climbed higher, warming the porch, and Evelyn felt a peace settle over her, deep and steady. She'd spent her life running, toward danger, away from grief, but now she could stop. The river hummed in the distance, its song a soft undercurrent to the morning, and she knew she'd go there again, walk its banks with Duke, let its quiet wash over her. But today this was enough. The porch, the tea, the people who'd stayed. Tom stood stretching and helped Lily to her feet. "We should get going. Lily's got school tomorrow, and I've got a shift." He paused, looking at Evelyn, his voice softening. "Your family, Ev. You know that, right?" She nodded, her throat tight, and managed a smile. "Yeah, I know. You too." Lily hugged her, quick and fierce, then ran to the car, waving as Tom followed, his hand raised in farewell. Evelyn watched them go, the car disappearing down the street, and turned back to Duke. She slid the photo closer, studying it again, then stood, her cane tapping as she moved inside. The living room was dim, the air cool, and she hung the frame on the wall beside Henry and Charlie's pictures, a trio of memories, a completed circle. "There," she said, stepping back, her voice steady. "Right where you belong." She returned to the porch, easing into her chair, and Duke settled beside her, his head resting against her leg. The river's song grew louder in her mind, a whisper of forever, and she closed her eyes, letting it carry her. The storm was over, The battles won, and here, with Duke, she was home. Some bonds didn't fade, they held fast, through rain and ruin, a quiet strength that outlasted time. Evelyn smiled, her hand on his fur, and let the morning unfold, peaceful at last. I hope you enjoyed this story. Subscribe to my channel so you don't miss touching stories. Leave a like and then comment below what you thought of the emotional stories. See you in the next video.